is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. The last time he was in a cavern, he was clearing out the loft, Stu Horvath.
That's upstairs, though. Is it technically a cavern?
Oh, yeah, you're right. I don't science, man. I'm a dropout.
Yeah, no, me too. It's all good.
It was a hard joke. It was listen, like, they don't own land, folks. You've been listening to this show now. We're going on 7 years. I think July 7th will be 7 years of this show. It's a lot of jokes. Yeah. They don't own land.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned how long that we've been at this, because I got a message from a listener who had just listened to our episode on Jennell Jaquays' Dark Tower module, asking if we had ever done one on the Caverns of Thracia, because apparently in the episode I promised that I would.
No, we haven't done one on that?
No, we haven't. So I went and I looked up last night to make sure that we hadn't done an episode, but I found the Dark Tower episode, and in the show notes I was just like, she also wrote Caverns of Thracia, which we'll be doing a episode on shortly. That was in 2021.
All right, well, you know.
So shortly is 3 years later in stew time, I guess.
Yeah, but you know what? Since the pandemic, like, it's all one long year.
It's
yeah,
the endless march.
Yeah, I mean, in my brain, like, everything is 5 years ago.
Yeah.
When was I a traveling salesman? I was like 5. I was like 5 years ago. It's like, oh, you know, when did I move to Kearney? I was like 5 years ago. Like, it's more than that. You know, like, it's been quite a while. So yeah, one long march, but here we are, late March, as it were, late March, as for when we promised this episode, talking about the Caverns of Thracia.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Caverns of Thracia was written after Dark Tower, but before Duck Tower. Yeah, I basically just brought that up because I love Duck Tower. Legendary Duck Tower, I guess, is the full name. But yeah, so Dark Tower is, you know, justifiably famed. It's probably Jennell's most famous work. It's often cited as one of the best Dungeons and Dragons modules. There was a poll in a Dragon magazine in the early 2000s ranking all of the various, or like, it was like the 100 best D&D modules, and Dark Tower was the only one that rated for the list that was not a TSR publication.
Really?
Yeah, no, people love that module. It was even it just recently came out with the from Goodman Games in their original Adventures Reincarnated series. They did a version of Dark Tower. They took the 80-page newsprint thinger from Judges Guild and turned it into a 3-volume hardcover slipcase. I had to take like 3 books off my shelf to fit it.
Worth it.
It's just so it's the heft, but it's great, and that sort of is emblematic of how good the module is and the lasting power that Jennell's work has. That's all said about Dark Tower. Caverns of Thracia sort of exists in Dark Tower's shadow. It is equally, if not better, than Dark Tower. There's sort of two great tastes that taste great together. Although, interestingly, Dark Tower was designed for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and actually came out sort of before all of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was out. Like, the rules came out, you know, one a year for 3 years. So there's a lot of like little weird things in there that don't necessarily line up with the rules as written once they were complete. Jennell had to kind of freestyle it in a couple instances. Caverns of Thracia, by contrast, was written for the basic Dungeons and Dragons flavor and published in 1979. So it's a little bit more stripped down, a little bit more in, you know, that older mode, which I've come to appreciate playing OSE as much as I have in the last year. Is
right. It's like refreshing.
Yeah, it's so stripped down and so lean, and it really is more different than I had played these games before, but having played, I guess, recently, and OSE really kind of recontextualizes the game with its interface. Like it makes it even cleaner, even leaner. And it really is a distinct game experience. It just plays differently than Advanced.
Yeah, for sure.
And you can see that in Caverns of Thracia. For one thing, it's a much smaller scale. I feel like Dark Tower is endless. There's the Overland. There's two towers, which are subterranean. They're buried in a landslide, and then there's all these dungeon levels that are sort of connecting the two towers. It's a really big space, and there's a ton of NPCs in it. A lot of factions. It's sort of like the first faction crawl. So like there's a lot of moving parts, and there's just like a lot going on, and almost every room feels like a trick or a gag, or nothing is what it seems. Whereas Caverns of Thracia is much more pared down, much more, I don't want to call it realistic, but sort of makes an ecological sense. It's a fantasy world, but and that's still apparent. Like there's monsters running around, and like the god of death is like hanging out, and there are weird rooms, but for the most part, like there's a verisimilitude to the design that I think is really interesting. So it's for basic. It's basically 4 levels. The idea is that there's a brief sort of introduction to the world. It's sort of posed as like a lost city. There's a overland area that's detailed in brief, that basically gives you access. It's just sort of ruins that the wilderness is basically reclaimed, and there's a couple access points for the subterranean area. Thracia was a powerful empire. They all worship death. They used the upper reaches of these caves beneath their city as a worship place for their worship of Thanatos, and there's also like a lot of like a tomb complex. But they also had all these beastmen slaves, right? Like gnolls, minotaurs, a new kind of critter called the Dog Brothers, which I like.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, they're humanoids with dog heads. Like that feels, right in a way, sort of overlooked. And, eventually the Thracians, there's a uprising, the Beastmen sort of destroy the civilization and remain there to this day. They're ruled by the Minotaur King, and the lower reaches are really their domain. But all of this, in one of the key features of Jennell Jaquays' dungeons is this idea that like different people use it for different things over time. And all of these, this entire complex was originally constructed by a now extinct or mostly extinct race of lizard sorcerer creatures. So there's a lot of baked in history to all that. And you could experience it and see how it's moved and changed, and as it's passed through the hands of these different inhabitants who've used the areas for different purposes. The upper reaches are pretty straightforward tomb complex kind of spaces. They are maybe the most typical of Jennell's dungeons that I could think of. Like they just make a certain amount of sense. There's a little bit of ritual space for like funerary rites, and then there's like some tombs and crypts and stuff. There's this cool section where if you're wounded and you only have a couple of hit points, sort of this emanation of death will come and try and embrace you and take you away.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, which is really great. And like I said, there's only 4 levels, but there's a bunch of like little sub levels that sort of connect and sit in between the main levels. And there's all these different routes going from in between the different levels. So there's a lot of like, it's very non-linear dungeon. And then when you get to the bottom where the beast people live, it gets really weird because like the lowest level is like this garden that like is presented very much like an above ground garden, except it's almost forested, except it's like, a mile deep. That's sort of, like very weird and cool. I really like the idea of like subterranean environments that are presented as like the surface world, but underground. It just, for some reason, it makes me think it's like a really easy way of making your players realize that there's something like deeply strange or wrong with the region.
Oh, that's always good, man, because it's being able to kind of like take the idea of what people think that they know and kind of turn it on its ear and like
Yeah.
kind of sow that like discord in their own minds. Because, in most cases, like when you're playing these games, like, there's only so much like a tile map or like a grid or like, a map that you've drawn on yourself or just theater of the mind can convey. And the rest is up to you and like what you're imagining. And if the adventure in some ways kind of becomes an unreliable narrator of sorts, that's going to make like the challenges you're going to face and the decisions you're going to make like so much more like harder than maybe they have to be. And that's great because then that actually kind of puts you on your heels a little bit as a player and gets the blood pumping. I love that.
It really is like expression through contrast. It's cool. Like there's like, I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of dryads down there that take care of the trees, and there's like the Minotaur has like a palace that was converted, Greek, ancient Greek style temple. Of course, Thracia is sort of a reference to Thrace, which is sort of part of the larger ancient Greek world. So this has a very like, Greek mythological feel to it, in contrast to Dark Tower, which is more Egyptian and Middle Eastern. But the thing I think that is particularly interesting about Caverns of Thracia is the way there aren't. So Dark Tower has a lot of factions, a lot of NPCs, a lot of people you could meet and talk to and kind of maybe get them on your side or convince them to do stuff for you. That isn't super a part of Thracia. There are NPCs and there are agendas, but most of them are just sort of firmly arrayed against the players. Like you're not going to be able to like have a conversation with the Minotaur King. He's just like, there's just not a real solid opportunity to parlay there.
And nor should there be. Like,
Yeah, right.
it's always fun when like when you got a game going and then your buddy's like, I'm going to try to talk to the guy. It's like, okay. And like, what's the check for me to be able to like make a diplomacy check against a friggin' Minotaur? Yeah. Yeah. That is a DC no.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It's not supposed to work.
So what it loses in that level of interaction with NPCs, it gains from this scheme that Jennell worked up for the random encounters. They're all basically guard patrols, and they're timed, and they have like pre-planned routes, and you can kind of, and basically having all these knowing where these patrols and encounters are going, because it's such a regimented society under there, makes the place feel like it's alive. It bustles in a way that I don't think any other dungeon really has for me. Now, you could leave that sort of thing to, the convenience of narrative, like have the patrol show up when it's, dramatically exciting. And I just did stuff like that in the Australia chapter of Masks of Nyarlathotep, my Call of Cthulhu game. And like there's a way to kind of have it be random, but that also, in the context of Masks, it was just like, I'm not going to have random patrols down here. I'm going to just have it make, dramatic sense when the bad guys show up. But basic D&D really kind of excels at, having stuff happen when it happens and making the characters have to deal with it. I think that that's one of the things that is just really core to the basic D&D experience. And because of that, I think that's one of the reasons why Caverns of Thracia is so important to the early OSR movement. You could see how Caverns of Thracia is a key touchstone for a lot of adventures that we see come out of, OSR and even since, like the ultralights and stuff. Like there's just an approach to it. OSE, Old School Essentials, like it all embodies this idea that like players go into a space and stuff happens to them without narrative meaning, and then in the doing of those things, because like the random encounters happen or like happenstance happens, narrative emerges out of that rather than it being bespoke by, the GM. Like it's just like you make things collide and then the story happens. And I think Caverns of Thracia is a really great example of that because of the way that the random encounters are structured as meaningful and like logical patrol sequences.
Yeah, I like that because a lot of times you always have the dungeon master, the game master, the keeper of secrets, in Mystic Punk's The Dark Guide, who are telling you the story, and then you're kind of playing along with the story, or like, they're giving you the prompts and the story kind of fleshes itself out, and there's always that kind of checkpoint where it's like, okay, we did all this stuff, now we're here, and now this kind of happens. Like, I love the idea that, like, instead of like, being told the story kind of tells itself as the action unfolds due to the happenings within the area that you're in. Because I mean, that's what's going to happen if you just, walk into a dungeon. Like, you're not supposed to be there, you didn't get like a little invitation to come enjoy a tea party in this dungeon. Like, more or less, you're there to loot the place.
Yeah. And like, if I'm breaking into like I don't know, like a trucking yard or something that has guards, right? Like they don't show up when it's like dramatically expedient. They just show up when they show up, and then you have to deal with it as like a thief, like it's just two different kinds of games, right? This is a different mechanical approach. And I think that you get a different feel and a different kind of vibe off of that. That really speaks to what the OSR, or the so-called OSR, is sort of aiming for.
Yeah, it's a different kind of drama. It is the drama from the unfolding of what happens.
Yeah.
Instead of like, a set piece that you're playing in, which I think is very cool. I mean, granted, like, as a person who does write a lot of set pieces that people get to play in, I also very much appreciate the, oh shit, guard's back from his lunch break. This is the path he's just going to walk down because this is the job that the guard is doing, like, yeah, it's, and I think that there is a very specific way that, because of like the current state that we're in the hobby, there's a lot of energy put behind, the storytelling aspect of it, and kind of finding a way to meld that into traditional Dungeons and Dragons style fantasy role playing. And it doesn't always work, because it's kind of like trying to put like a circle peg in like an oval shaped thing, but they're, like they kind of fit, but they don't fully fit. Like, you're still gonna have to force it to a certain degree.
Yeah. And it changes the thing, right?
And it completely changes the thing, and whereas like, we have like a lot of great story games out there now, which are made and built around the actual idea of, hey, this is more about like us collaboratively telling the story, and I think that like, something like, Caverns of Thracia is cool, especially in the way you're describing it to me. Like, I know, full transparency, I've never run it, I've never played it, but like, it's always nice to kind of go back to that thing that made the hobby you love like so special in the first place. Like, I always liken it to AC/DC's Back in Black, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, we have to do something new, so let's not reinvent the wheel. We'll go back to what worked in the first place, but just with a new singer.
Exactly. And worth pointing out that if I kind of think that the end of the 70s, there were 3 modules, adventure modules, that sort of summed up the experience of RPGs in the 70s. And it's Keep on the Borderlands, Snakepipe Hollow for RuneQuest, and Caverns of Thracia. And they all share certain kinds of just touchstones that all simultaneously developed and feel very similar. They all involve caves that are inhabited by monstrous humanoids that have lots of non-linear paths, no single way to get through them. Most of them are intended to be tackled multiple times, a small slice of the dungeon at once. And they all, like I said, they all have caves. They're all more than Dark Tower. Caverns of Thracia is a like a really important representation of the moment in time that it was released in.
It's funny that you mentioned this, and we've talked about this before on the show. Like, Snakepipe Hollow, Keep on the Borderlands. It's kind of like two sides of the same coin. With this, it becomes like a power trio in a way, and like, where you say you can kind of like overlay them on top of each other, and it's all kind of variations on the same theme. It kind of like makes you think of like a band like Rush, where like they're all playing the same song, but they're all doing different parts in their own way, and it kind of comes together, and like you're like, well, it's all different, but it's kind of like very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get into this in the book. I don't know what the conclusion is. And immediately it stops. Like everything goes in its own direction in the 80s. But like the 70s and the early steps of role-playing game development and evolution, like it really does seem like it was on a pretty set path for the first 6 years. Because everybody sort of arrives at the same destination in different ways, but like they're different but also the same, and you can see the sameness as clearly as you can see the differences. It's cool. And then like I said, in the 80s it explodes and everything, like it just gets increasingly weird.
Yeah, I mean, look at the UK punk explosion in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And you look at a band like The Clash and what The Clash was doing in like 77, very on par with everything that everyone else was doing.
Yeah.
And then like 1980, we get like Rock the Casbah.
Yeah.
Right? Like and a lot of those other bands were doing the same thing. It's just like, it's a very different The Damned, right?
Yeah.
It's all very much like the explosion happens, everyone is like on the same page, same energy, same vibe, same direction, and then suddenly everyone's off in their own way.
Yeah. And it like happens over and over again too, right? Like Blitz comes out like what, 82, 81, and like it's sort of like it's in the aftermath of the initial punk explosion. Everybody's tired of it, and then Blitz comes out, they're like punk rock again, and then they go through the same thing, and like they get to new age, and it's just like, oh, they're a post-punk band or like goth band or whatever. And like it, but like the same beats sort of, even though it already happened before, it's happening again. It's all Battlestar Galactica when it comes down to it.
Holy shit, you are right. You just go home on that, guys. That's it. Someone's morning commute just got like a lot more eye-opening. You're welcome. Oh, I don't even know where to go from there.
Well, I mean, yeah, we can wrap up. I just want to say, of course, we lost Jennell earlier this year, and it's really sad. She created a lot of fantastic work that is going to endure. It's super important to the hobby, and she left behind a rich legacy. And as sad as her passing is, you can't be too sad having a legacy like that, I think.
Hear, hear, man. Hear, hear. Well, this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I've already posted about Caverns of Thracia and Dark Tower and the legendary Duck Tower. And you can find entries on all of those things in my book, Monsters, Aliens, and Holes of the Ground, which is available at fine bookstores everywhere.
Which is pretty awesome, man. We really do. We love our Discord because it's one of our favorite places to hang out on the internet. It's probably the only place we like hanging out on the internet, if I'm being honest. But, we always appreciate it when you post pictures of monsters, aliens, and holes in the ground when you see it out in the wild. It's like, it's cool. It's not like...
Oh man, the one David Blandy sent me the other, like last week, of it like in the shop window in a bookstore in Copenhagen. Like, so cool.
That's very cool. Internationally known to rock the microphone. So we are stoked. And again, we appreciate, we mentioned earlier in the show, it's coming up on 7 years. I'm sure we'll have more to say about that once we hit the 7th anniversary. However, in the meantime, just, a quick little thank you to everyone who's been listening to the show. If it's your first time, welcome. If it's your going on 7th year, happy soon to be anniversary, folks. We love you all and we appreciate you. You can find me across the internet at John McGuire RPG. I've been posting a little more, mostly on Instagram, because I've been traveling. I've been going places, doing a lot of conventions, hanging out. By the time this episode drops, it'll be just a few weeks before the Geek Fleet. And if you're in Kearney, And if you're not in Kearney, it's too long of a drive for a very short but excellent convention.
Yeah, don't come down from Boston unless you're Levi Rubeck. Then you have to come down.
Yeah, I think it's a contractual obligation at this point. Yeah. We also have you can find us Yeah, I don't know. If you like to,
But people know where to find us, man. If you don't feel it, we can just go home. It's
no. You know what? It just you do it for so long. You're like, how do I play that chord again?
Yeah.
If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us if you really like the show. I haven't had enough coffee yet. That's why. Why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerepg. We got early release episodes, usually on Friday, sometimes on Saturday, depending on when in the week we record them. We have a tier where you can play an RPG with me once a month. I'm actually setting up a steady day every month to hopefully get more people playing the games. By the time this episode drops, I will have either run Neon Lords, Cthulhu, or maybe Honey Heist. I don't know. I leave it up to you. You pick, and then I roll it from there. Stu's got a tier where you play an ongoing West Marches campaign with Stu, which is awesome and very deadly from what I've been told. We've got a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of, patreon.com/vintagerepg. If you are shopping on Kickstarter, you've probably heard the last 2 episodes about Mystic Punks. Mystic Punks Kickstarter is live right now, going strong. I don't know what day this episode is going to air, so I don't know what day it's going to be on the Kickstarter. However, it's going to be awesome. You're going to love this game. And I actually got to write a piece for Mystic Punk's Weird Wanderings Volume 1, which is with the Kickstarter. I wrote an adventure called The Ballad of Dirt Stash Wizard, and it's about as weird as you can imagine it to be. So check out Mystic Punks on Kickstarter. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.